Strange but true stories, tales from the light side, the dark side, and the other side. I'm Steve White. From time to time, we all see or hear things that we can't quite process or understand. Mostly we pass them off as some trick of the imagination, or our eyes seeing something obscure that our brain fills in the pieces to create something that wasn't truly there. Or was it? Are some of us given peeks into another world or another dimension that we pass off as mind tricks when it really was happening? The following stories were submitted to us by viewers just like you, and these first two stories were submitted to Strange But True recently from two different people in different parts of the United States, 42 years apart. And while the details are different, notice the similarity of the person they claim to have seen. Guardian of the Forest. Let me start by saying that I graduated with honors in criminal justice from a Big Ten university, and I've spent the last 15 years working as a private investigator. I am therefore a person who is professionally trained to observe and report. I've always been open-minded, but would never have said before that I truly believe in the paranormal, astrology, superstitions, or any of that stuff. Well, that has now changed, partially because of the story I'm about to relate, but also because of other instances, which I am not quite ready to share yet. That being said, here's my strange but true story. In August 2012, my family and some friends went camping in San Gorgonio State Park in California. On a hot and sunny afternoon, we elected to go for a hike further up into the mountains. The path was very rough and narrow at one point, with a sheer 30-foot drop down onto rocks on one side, so we had to walk single file. I led the group with my wife and daughter behind me, followed by my sister-in-law and then two friends. As we approached the bottom of a switchback turn in the trail, I looked up to see a very short man squatting or sitting on a rock or stump just off the trail in the midst of some thick brush on the outside or the cliffside edge of the trail. He looked very old and had deep wrinkles in his face, knotted veins on his hands, and bushy white hair and beard. He stared at me with kindly, piercing blue eyes and grinned a wide, closed-mouthed grin that went from ear to ear and pushed his bushy mustache up into his nose. The man appeared to be properly proportioned, but very short, under 5 feet tall. Atop his head, he wore a large, wide-brimmed hat that was very rumpled, with a caved-in crown. He wore a dark green long-sleeve shirt under dirty old-style overalls, like you might see a farmer from the Dust Bowl wearing. He rested both of his hands on a walking stick, which he held out in front of him. My first thought was that he must be very hot in those clothes, as I was in shorts and a tank top and sweating profusely. My second thought was, why the heck is he in that thicket of bushes? When I first saw the man, he was approximately 20 feet away from me. I continued walking toward him, but instinctually swiveled my head around to check on my wife and young daughter because I immediately thought that this man being here off the trail in the bushes was quite odd. He didn't seem threatening, just out of place, and more than a little strange. My wife and daughter were fine, so I turned my attention back to the path and the man ahead of us. But he was gone. I would have seen him if he had climbed out of the thicket onto the trail because I only looked away for a split second. Plus, none of the bushes were moving to mark his passage. I stopped in my tracks because I was so surprised that he was gone. I thought that he must have fallen backwards down the mountainside, so I rushed forward to where he had been, but there was nothing there. No sign of him anywhere. There was only our path, the cliff with its 30-foot drop, and the other side of the path after the switchback, which I could clearly see once I reached the cliff edge where he had been. He was gone. Vanished. I turned around and asked everyone in our group if they had seen the man. I was quite insistent. No one had seen him, despite being only paces behind me on a relatively straight part of the path. When I told them what I had seen, they all brushed it off as nothing. It was a bright, sunny afternoon. I'm in good physical shape and was hiking. I was not tired, drunk, or under the influence of prescription medication or any other drug. I know what I saw, and I know that there is no way that a regular human being, especially one as small and old as this man appeared to be, could have moved from that spot that quickly without being seen or leaving evidence of his passage. I have never heard another story like this. I have no idea who or what the man was. Whenever I think of him now, and I can always see his face and his piercing blue eyes clearly, I feel like he was not a man or a ghost, but some sort of forest spirit or guardian, as crazy as that sounds. The encounter reminded me of old European tales of people encountering dwarves and gnomes and such. The locomotive. It was 1970, and I was with my father, brother, and a few friends hiking at Robert E. Lee Park, or sometimes referred to as Lake Roland in Baltimore County, Maryland. I was 9 at the time, and we were finishing up our hike around the lake when we saw a short, thick-bearded man pulling a very small locomotive engine along the trail on an old-looking steel-casted cart. He was about as tall as I was at that time, a little under 5 feet tall, and he was wearing a Navy train conductor's uniform with the hat and everything. He was mumbling something as he walked and pulled, something to the effect of, "I've got to get to the train. I've got to get to the train. I've got to get to the train." We stood in amazement and disbelief at what we were seeing. About 130 years before, this area was a bustling railroad line. But in 1970, though some of the track still existed in the park, most of it was gone. Even though the train I remember him pulling was a short, miniature version of an old steam engine, from what I can recollect, it was about 3 feet long and 2 feet high. It would have still been too heavy to lift or drag between the still existing rail pieces. And then again, why would he be doing that at all? He looked and sounded really spooky, like he was not of this world or dimension. He didn't take any notice of us, nor did he stop. I checked with the B&O Railroad Museum recently to see if anybody over the years had ever mentioned seeing this old fellow wandering the woods, pulling this train along the trails, like we had nearly 50 years ago. They said they hadn't heard of anything like that being reported. What did we see that day on the trail? I just wonder if anybody else has had a similar experience. Vivid dream or journey back in time? This happened about 30 years ago, and I had the most vivid, lucid dream I have ever had. I was a teenager at the time, living in a town called Leighton Buzzard in Bedfordshire, England. It was summer, and I was home from school on break at the time, and I decided to do what teenagers do in the afternoon: take a nap. I curled up on my parents' living room sofa and drifted off to sleep. While I was sleeping, my grandparents stopped by the house for a visit. Now, that wasn't unusual at all, but I remember being very aware of them being there and even could hear them telling my parents a story. I was still asleep, drifting in and out of awareness. You know, that half asleep, half awake state? Anyway, I was hearing the story about a specific area of our hometown. They were talking about how different it looked back in the 1920s and 30s. Now, this was an area that had a canal bridge and a traffic roundabout. While they were telling their story, I was having this vivid dream of how the area looked with old cars mixed in with horse and carriages. I could see people walking around dressed in period clothing. It was almost like a movie the way it was playing in my mind. I remember noises and colors, specific buildings and the canal bridge. I even saw this memorial statue in the middle of the traffic roundabout. That was something I had never seen in real life. A short time later, I woke up. My folks and grandparents had stopped talking, and I wandered in sleepily to where they were in the kitchen, which was about 10 feet away from where I had been sleeping, and said hello. I told my grandparents I'd been having this dream about what they had been talking about. I described all the things I had seen in my dream. Now, I don't think there's anything truly bizarre about having a dream in real time while you're half asleep listening to somebody's conversation. But when I said, "Hey, I even saw the memorial statue in the middle of the roundabout. I think it was commemorating the fallen soldiers in the First World War," I described it in great detail. My grandparents seemed surprised that I knew that. They had not mentioned that in their talk with my parents, and in fact, my mention of it made them think about it for the first time in a long time. I had never heard or seen pictures of this memorial statue, and according to my grandparents, it had not been there for a very long time. In fact, they said the memorial column with the statue I had described had been moved prior to World War II, well before I had been born. Did I have a flashback? Was it a glitch in time that allowed me to slip back to that era for a few brief minutes? Or was there some other reason, maybe purely coincidental? I don't know. But it was a really weird thing that happened. The camping trip. Several months ago, a friend and I went on a camping trip in England. We got to the spot, set up the tent and other stuff, and then spent the evening sitting around the fire and just talking. We had a few beers, but nothing crazy. My friend decided to turn in a little earlier than me, and it was about 1 a.m. when I extinguished the campfire, went to the tent, and climbed into my sleeping bag. My friend was out cold. I was a little surprised I went to sleep so easily considering how loudly he was snoring. I slept pretty well that night, despite the heavy sleeper next to me, but I woke up earlier than normal, around 5 a.m. the following morning. My friend wasn't in his sleeping bag. I checked outside where we had our fire going the night prior, and he wasn't there either. I wandered around the camp for a little bit, but couldn't find him anywhere. So I called his cell phone, but it kept beeping and saying I couldn't reach him. I went back to the tent to check again. His sleeping bag was there. His clothes were still there. He hadn't packed up and left. I waited for several hours, and he never returned. There were a few folks nearby that I went and talked to, seeing if by chance they had seen him that morning. They just shook their heads and said they hadn't seen anybody matching the description or heard anything either. I didn't know what to do. Should I stick around a while longer in case he got lost and just happens to wander back? Should I go off and try to find him, even though I wouldn't know where to start looking? We were out in this big field. It wasn't like there was a bunch of trails where he could have hiked. Also, he wasn't one to just wander off. And if he wanted to leave, he would have said something. Or at least I thought he would. I waited a few hours longer, getting more and more frustrated. I thought about somebody possibly abducting him or an animal, but I felt like maybe I was just being paranoid. I was concerned, but I couldn't sit around all day and night waiting on him to show back up. So I packed up the car and went back towards home. I kept trying to call his cell phone, but got the same message about not being able to be reached. I called another one of our friends to see if by chance he had heard anything from him. He said, "Yeah, I saw him earlier today. We spoke quickly, but that was it. I had to get somewhere." "Why, anything wrong?" I asked, Did he say anything about going camping last night?" "No, but again, we didn't talk long," he said. "And you're sure it was him?" "Yeah." "Did he say anything about me at all?" "Nope." "Should he have?" "No, I suppose he didn't need to. Never mind. Thanks." I was not happy. How could he just leave? Leave all his stuff, expecting me to clean up his clothes and sleeping bag and bring it back. And he not even say anything about anything. Well, at least he was back in town and was apparently okay, not abducted by aliens or mauled by a wild animal or kidnapped at gunpoint. I tried over the next several days to contact him, but still got the same weird message. I gave up after a few days. 8 days later, I was out walking, and I ran into my camping buddy. I was still upset about the whole ordeal and asked him right off, "What the hell? Why did you just walk off?" He looked at me really, really strangely. "What are you talking about?" "Don't be stupid. Last week, when we were camping, why did you leave in the middle of the night and wander off and not tell me?" He said, I didn't go camping with you. When did you say we went? It was 8 days ago. We went, set up the tent, built the fire, drank some beers. Remember? No, he said. I haven't been camping in a long time. Probably several months. I don't know what you're talking about. And you're saying that I, or whoever, just wandered off in the middle of the night and didn't tell you, and you think that was me? Stop messing around. Of course it was you. We were out there for hours. I've got your stuff at my house. I'll bring it to you tomorrow. Do that. I would love to see what I left out there. We walked away from each other, and I can imagine he had as perplexed a face as I had. This didn't make any sense, but I knew I could prove it. When I got home later that night, I went to where I had stashed his stuff in my flat. It wasn't there. I looked all over. Couldn't find the bag. Couldn't find the sleeping bag. Not a stitch of clothing of his was in my flat. What happened to it? I was freaking out. This couldn't be happening. I looked everywhere I could have possibly put the stuff, but nothing. I called him and said that I couldn't find his stuff. He told me that after he bumped into me, he had gone back to his flat and checked for his sleeping bag, and it was exactly where he remembered putting it. It hadn't been used in a while, he told me. I couldn't make sense of it. We had been camping. I was sure of it. Or was I? To this day, I cannot make any sense out of what happened in that 8-day stretch. This has been another strange but true stories submitted to us by viewers just like you. Do you have a strange but true story you would like to share with us? We would love to hear about it. Send us an email to strangebutTrueStories2@gmail.com. Let us know what you thought of these stories in the comments below, and subscribe if you haven't already. Check out our new website when you have a chance. And as always, thanks for watching this video. I'm Steve White. Until next time.